Let's chat about buyer requested repairs from the home inspection. What happens next after all the buyer inspections have been completed? Well, per the terms of the contract, once inspections are complete, you as the buyer have some choices to make before the end of your inspection deadline. You can do one of three things. The first is choose to accept the property in as-is condition. Number two is ask the seller for some repairs. Or three, depending on the terms of the contract you signed, you may actually have the option to cancel the contract if you don't like what you discovered about the house's condition during the inspections. So let's discuss first the as-is condition. If the inspections are satisfactory to you and you decide to not ask the seller for any repairs at all, then you are agreeing to take the property as it is, so as is condition. Usually, once inspections are completed, the buyer will send the seller a repairs request addendum asking for repairs to be completed prior to closing. So in this case, our contract also requires the buyer to include any inspection reports that show proof that these repairs are needed. Once the seller receives the buyer's request, this begins what we call this repair negotiation time period. We then negotiate with the seller as to what will actually be repaired. And the seller has some choices too. They can choose to repair absolutely everything the buyer is asking to be repaired, some of the items, or none of the items. If the seller counters the buyer repair request, then the buyer could choose to not accept the seller's counter offer and they could terminate the contract at that point. So as I mentioned in an earlier video, this is the second time during a transaction that you as a buyer will negotiate with the seller. Our local contract, it does limit repairs to things to include safety items, mechanical systems, and any other kind of systems issues. So remember, if that carpet is worn or the roof is just old but it's not leaking at the time of the inspection, then a buyer cannot ask for those items to be repaired. I actually usually suggest that the buyer really just concentrate on asking the seller to correct the more critical or safety issues first, as they are most important. Once we send over the buyer's repair request to the seller, it's then a waiting game to see what the seller's counter will be. And it will take the seller some time to sit down with their agent and decide which items are they willing to repair. If needed, the seller may actually need to get bids from contractors so that they have a true grasp on what their possible repair costs may be. As an experienced agent, I'm going to help guide you through all of these decisions on which repairs to ask for. Many times, once an area of concern has been brought to the seller's attention, the item is required by law to then be disclosed by the seller, and sometimes even needs to be repaired prior to closing, whether it's with you as the buyer or a buyer at a later time. In most cases, a seller will try to work through these issues with the buyer that they already have under contract. Now, this does not mean that the seller will repair everything that is requested by the buyer, but in most cases, we will negotiate through the process. I'm Anita L. Williamson, and I hope this explains the negotiation process a little bit better. I know it can be pretty confusing at times, but I want to make sure to set you up for buying success.